Hey everybody, good morning. It's time to get started, and I think I'm going to need lots of time today. But man, look around this room. It is good to have this room full again. I feel like Thanksgiving break, everybody leaves. A lot of people out of town, and then also we've had the meat class going on and all that. So it's good to have the group back together. There are a lot of good things coming up. We're at the end of the year, but a lot of good things on the horizon. With the New Year's Eve bash, that's always fun. We have the big old youth group supper just around the corner. We have EU coming up in about, oh man, just a little over a month. So that's something to look forward to. My favorite weekend of the year. A lot of good things that are happening and a lot of good things going on. So I am glad that you're here this morning. Now, as we begin, who's got something good to share? Anybody got anything good to kick things off with? Any good news? What do you got?
I got my car back.
Hey, congratulations! All right, good. Good deal. Good deal.
What happened, Marky?
Well, we don't have to get into that story.
We don't have, yeah.
That's for another time.
All right. Anybody else got any good things to share? I love that Jade rocks a leather jacket. It's just great. It's awesome. All right. Well, I don't know if you have anything to share, but does this work, baby? Battery's busted on this thing. There we go. Did you do that or did I? I did that. So this was, we went to Disney World a few, I guess 2 weeks ago, and I hadn't shared much about it, but this is like my favorite picture of our trip. This is so good. Anyway, it was one of those hey, let's get on this roller coaster. Does it go upside down? Hey, let's just get on the roller coaster, So don't tell them too much about it. And yeah, that was the moment that I think he realized this is an intense ride. So, do your parents, did they trick you to get on your roller coaster? To get on a roller coaster? Yes. How many of you had parents who deceived you to get you on your first roller coaster? Must be terrible parenting. Mine did that too. That's how I got on my first roller coaster. But I was thankful after I did it because then I would ride others. So anyway, it was good. We're going to be in the book of Daniel. So go ahead and open your Bibles to Daniel if you would. It's been a little while since I've taught this class. I appreciate Jody Marble, who, by the way, is an excellent teacher. He's done such a good job. I hope you've enjoyed listening to him. Last week I know he taught. I hope you enjoyed your Romans class. How was that, by the way? Was it good? Did you learn some stuff? That's such a deep book, but it's filled with great teaching and important teachings, but really can be a difficult book. So that's why we made it a meat class. It's for people that really wanted to dig into something kind of difficult. So in this class, historically, we've been sort of following the word association study. So as you've been hopefully reading some stuff in the word association, we've been trying to do things that would complement the reading. And so this week, we kicked off a new study in the book of Daniel. How many of you are trying to read the book of Daniel this month? Oh, I hope that you'll try. If you're not, I hope you'll try. As we begin, now, those of you who are familiar with the book of Daniel, or maybe you're not, but you know maybe bits and pieces about it, what's a story or what's a thing that you know about the book? Just anything at all. What do you know about the book of Daniel? Throw something out.
Daniel and the Lions Den.
There we go. Kind of the same answer. You said the lions, and you said Daniel and the lions. And so we combined those. We got Daniel, we got lions. Daniel and the Lion's Den, definitely a famous story that comes out of this book. Anybody else know a story that comes out of the book of Daniel? You can kind of peruse. You ever use that word? You can peruse the book of Daniel and see what's there if you want to. You can scan through it real quick. Yeah, you got the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. That's also found in the book of Daniel. So those are probably the two big ones, right? The two most famous things to come out of the book of Daniel. So what we're going to do is quickly this morning, I'm going to do my best to walk through the first 5 chapters of Daniel. Today, if you're reading in the Word Association and you kept up with the daily reading, today is chapter 5. If you didn't, you got time to catch up. It's a really, as Tyler mentioned, it's a really great story. It's a really interesting read. It's sort of different than just about any other book of the Bible because of the way the story is written. It's just so fascinating. So we're going to walk through it, talk about what makes it fascinating, see what we can learn together, and I hope really enjoy this time together. So as we begin in Daniel chapter 1, I've entitled that chapter, Strangers in a Foreign Land. So Daniel is a young man when the story begins. So you got pretty much a teenager, all right? So a story about a teenager who is ripped away from his homeland. And he's this young man taken from Judah, or Jerusalem, and taken into the world power at the time, the most powerful nation in the world. He's transported to Babylon. So all of his family none of his family is mentioned in the book. So here's this kid who just seems like he's kind of all alone. That being said, he's there with some friends, and we meet them pretty quickly in the book, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And we'll talk a little bit more about them in just a minute. So let's kick it off. We're going to read Daniel chapter 1. There's an extra dash in there. I really hate typos. I'm sorry for that. But Daniel chapter 1, verses 3 through 7. You can follow along with me. It says, Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of nobility, 4 youths without blemish, of good appearance and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace and to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. So this would be like kids who are members of the Junior Honor Society, all right? So like really impressive, standout kids, like straight-A students, really, kind of your standouts. Verse 5, the king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate. Oh man, so they're going to eat right, eat like kings. And of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, so they're going to get this like royal education. And at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. Oh man, by the way, if you know anything about Hebrew, you know stuff about Hebrew, maybe not a lot, that's okay. But there's some kind of common suffixes, prefixes, like parts of Hebrew words that are present, like in the word, does label pointer work on this? It doesn't. Anyway, in Daniel, you have that El, and that's a word that a lot of times is connected to God, like El Shaddai, Emmanuel, right? Hananiah, a lot of times that Yah, like Yahweh, or Jehovah, like those kind of things. Mishael, there's that El again, Azariah. So they're Hebrew names. A lot of those names have parts of God in them. Okay? So that's just kind of interesting to show who they belong to. They serve the God of Israel. So verse 7, and the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Oh man, so they have these beautiful Hebrew names. Look what happens. Daniel, he was called Belteshazzar. Hananiah, he called Shadrach. Mishael, he called Meshach. And Azariah, he called Abednego. So all these Hebrew names are changed, and guess what they are named after now? They're named after Babylonian gods. So these names that honored the God of Israel, that identity is taken from them, and now they're given these new names that are all sort of attached to Babylonian gods. So interesting. All right. So if you can imagine being in Daniel's shoes, what do you think might have been challenging about some of this stuff? Why was this challenging, do you think? What were some challenges that these guys probably had to deal with? Throw something out. Who's been a new person, maybe a new kid at school or moved to a new place? What are some challenges that you face when you're new? Throw something out. Anybody? Yeah?
Being real or being like yourself.
Oh, okay. So maybe a little bit of like, how am I going to act in a group? Am I going to be myself? Do I feel comfortable being myself yet? Or do I want to blend in? Very good. All right, what else?
Like being in a group, like you don't know where to sit or you don't know who to like talk to and all
Yeah.
that.
Absolutely.
So you just kind of like sit by yourself, or if like the teacher tells you to partner up with somebody, you have like friends, but not like a best friend who you can go to.
Yeah. Starting over is hard. Making brand new friends, figuring out social cues, where am I supposed to sit, where am I supposed to go. Yeah, all those things are challenging. What else is challenging? I think especially here, right? For Daniel especially. It's not like, well, I went to Wilson Central last year and this year I went to Mount Juliet High School. What would be really challenging in this situation?
I would just say like the last question, if they lay of the land, he doesn't know how to survive in this new Babylonian environment. The culture's really different.
I love that you said that word at the end, culture. This is culture shock, right? Where you've gone from, now, I know it's not the same, but if you like lived in America all your life, and then all of a sudden another country conquers you, and you're taken back as a prisoner of war, and you live in Afghanistan. Whoa, wouldn't that be really tough? Really hard? Like, man, that would be so, a new language. You can't understand the people that you're around. Completely different culture. And then like his faith is different, right? Well, his faith is the same, but the faith that's all around him is different. Okay? So let's think about that as we continue. I think it was Eden who said it first, am I going to blend in? It really sounded like what we just talked about when we had our retreat recently. What's Daniel going to do? Is he going to blend in or is he going to stand out? Well, here at the very beginning of the story, we learn the kind of person that Daniel's going to be. He decides to stand out. Let's look at verse 8 from chapter 1. Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself. That's interesting that it would be written this way. He would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. Now, what's that about? Well, if you're a Jew, that's your background, right? There's some things, if you're Jewish, and still to this day, there's some things that Jewish people will not eat, right? You've heard the idea of being kosher, like something's okay for them to eat. So, when he goes into this brand new place and the king rolls out this buffet table with all kinds of food, there's some things that Daniel goes, you know what, I can't eat that if I'm going to continue to serve my God. All right? So that's the way Daniel rolls. There's some things that he's not going to do because of his faith. And I think that really important word that you're going to see in Daniel's life tells a lot about him is this word resolve. What does it mean if you resolve to do something? What's resolve? You sung the song at church, right? I am resolved. What does that mean? You want to sing? You want to stand up and sing it like right now, like the invitation song? We can if you want. Anna, did you have your hand up?
To like forgive somebody and like move on and like the conflict you have.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. So you're like that conflict is resolved. It's done. Yeah. What else could we say?
Like firmly determined to do something.
You would say like firmly determined to do something. Just what you can say. Oh, just stop talking. Yeah. So if you're resolved, how about we say it this way? We have New Year's resolutions. Resolve. We're resolving. We're determined. What was that definition one more time? You're firmly determined. All right. So he is firmly determined that there are some things he's not going to do. Is that an important word for a Christian? To be resolved. There's some things that I am not going to do. When we sing that, I am resolved no longer to linger charmed by the world's delight. I'm not going to be seduced by the things of the world. I'm going to resolve, I'm going to be determined, firmly determined to make sure I don't do this. All right? Y'all ever heard that phrase right there? When in Rome, do as the Romans do. What does that mean? What does it mean? To blend in? Yep. It's the way they do it in Rome. That's the way I'm going to do it too. All right? So, it would have been easy. I want you to think a little bit more on this topic before we move on. It would have been easy for Daniel to abandon everything he'd been taught back home. Because, I mean, maybe in some people's minds, the God of Daniel abandoned him. Right? Like, where are you, God? Why have you allowed your people to be taken captive? Why have you allowed Jerusalem to be overtaken and destroyed and run over? And so there's probably a lot of people that are like, that God of Israel, he's nothing. Okay? But Daniel did not forget his God. And I think that's really important as we think about how Daniel didn't forsake his faith in a foreign place. And neither should we. There are a lot of people who, when they leave home, when they go away to college, they leave their faith behind too. And I hope that all of you in this room will remember the things you've been taught and will never let go of those things. Again, Daniel, this new guy in a new place, he could have gone, this is a fresh start for me. Forget everything I once knew. I'm gonna see what this is about, and I'm gonna explore. Maybe the God of Babylon, or the gods of Babylon, or the gods that I didn't serve. That's not who Daniel is. That's not what Daniel did. So I hope that you might go to a college where you stand out because nobody else at that school is going to live like you live. Nobody else is going to believe the things that you believe. The question is, will you forsake your faith, or will you hold tight to it? Cling closely to the God who brought you where you are today. I think that's so important for us to remember. So this recurring theme in Daniel that I think we're going to see over and over again is that choosing to have faith, choosing to be faithful, is really inconvenient sometimes. Choosing to be faithful is really costly sometimes. Choosing to be faithful is really gutsy. It takes a lot of faith, right, to be faithful. And so our question is, will I be faithful no matter the cost? And that's something you see in Daniel the lion's den. It's something you see with the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There's a lot of times in Daniel's life where he decided, that word resolved. He resolved he's going to be different. All right, let's go to chapter 2. How are we doing on time? Not great. We're going to keep moving. Chapter 2. We'll call this one the impossible dream. So there's a new king in Babylon in chapter 2. His name is Nebuchadnezzar. He has a terrifying dream, and he's looking for someone to interpret it for him. Only there's a twist. You know, we read other stories where people are like, I wonder what this dream means. Well, Nebuchadnezzar kind of lays it out a different way. I wanted to put this on the screen for you. The king said to them, he calls like all the king's men together, his advisors, his counselors, his wise men. He says, I had a dream. Sounds like Martin Luther King. I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. The Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show you the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word for me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins. Okay? So they're like, hey, tell us what the dream is, and we'll tell you what the dream means. What's the king say? No. How about you tell me what my dream is, and then tell me what the dream means? He's not even going to tell them what the dream is. They have to come in and just tell them what the dream is. That's kind of different than other times we see people want to interpret dreams. So, it's a high-stakes guessing game, right? If you're wrong about this, if nobody can do it, what's the consequence? You're going to rip all your arms and legs off. That's pretty intense, right? That sounds like, did y'all play Mortal Kombat? It sounds like a fatality in Mortal Kombat. That's a high-stakes guessing game. All right, so just to kind of let you know what happens next, nobody can help the king. There are all these Chaldean wise men and dream interpreters or whatnot, and nobody can resolve this one. Resolve? No one can solve this one. Because of this, the king was angry and very furious and demanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. He's about to just wipe everybody out in Babylon. However, Daniel comes to save the day. He appears before the king and says, no wise men, enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. And he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar, what will be in the latter days. Daniel explains the dream, not in his own power, but because God reveals what the dream means and reveals the dream. So let's read it. You saw, O king, Daniel tells him the dream. You saw, O king, and behold, a great image, this image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold, all together were broken in pieces, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Okay, what does the dream mean? Get your Bibles open. I'm going to give you a minute to look at it, because this is pretty cool. All right, we're going to look at Daniel 2, 36 through 45. It's about 10 verses there. I'll let you read it and tell us what the dream was about. What a strange dream. Something really terrified the king. All right, Daniel 2, 36 through 45. See if you can figure out what the dream. Well, it's not really figured out. It tells you. But what does it mean? All right, what's the dream mean? What's happening? Okay, there's going to be a divided kingdom. All right, what else does it mean? Throw out some more stuff. Okay, so the statue represents kingdoms of the world, right? And right now, he says in the dream, the head of gold represents who? King Nebuchadnezzar, kind of the top of the food chain, right? All right, but then something kind of cool happens at the end of the story. This stone that's cut out and like wipes out all the other nations. What does that represent? God's kingdom that will never be destroyed. Do you see how God pretty much exalts himself over all these like earthly nations? And it's just a reminder that God's kingdom will never fall. God's kingdom will never be destroyed. God will be superior in every way, right? And so something you're going to see in the book of Daniel is these kings, and really it's a common theme throughout the scriptures, especially the Old Testament. Kings would exalt themselves and think they're really important, but God would remind those kings who would exalt themselves that he was the true king. And that he who would exalt himself would be humble, right? And so that's important for us to remember. So, all right, we'll keep moving. Watch this, Daniel 2:47. The king answered and said to Daniel, after Daniel tells him this dream, "Truly, your God is God of gods and Lord of kings and revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery." He's just like in awe, and you're like, man, maybe the king like gets it, right? Well, look what happens in chapter 3. Then Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel and commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. The king answered and said to Daniel, "Truly your God is God of gods, Lord of lords, King of kings, revealer of mysteries. You've been able to reveal this mystery." Watch what happens in chapter 3. Then Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. All right, this is the story of the fiery furnace. He essentially builds an idol, and he says everybody needs to bow down and worship the idol. Wait a minute. In the story, in the dream, there was a statue, and what was the head man on it? Fascinating. So the king, instead of recognizing God as the true king, very quickly forgets the true God, and he puts himself, I guess you could say, in the place of God. People need to bow down and worship this image that I created. And by the way, it's made of gold. Fascinating. All right, we'll keep moving. Yeah, he told him, you're the head of gold, and then made an image of gold. All right, so Daniel chapter 3, I call this the story of the three musketeers. You got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the fiery furnace. The king has a weird thing for ripping people's limbs off. He says again, at the end of the story, I'm not going to spend our time going through the story of the fiery furnace because everybody would know that story, so I'm going to kind of pass on. But at the end of the story, Nebuchadnezzar says, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way." You're like, okay, finally, the kings of Babylon get it. Right? They understand who the true God is. There's one true king, and it's God. Well, that doesn't last very long. We'll keep moving. Chapter 4, same king, Nebuchadnezzar. Man, when will he learn? In chapter 4, watch what happens. I call this chapter beast mode. This is so cool. If you've been reading the book of Daniel, chapter 4 is almost unlike any other chapter of the Bible, where Daniel's telling the story, or here's Daniel's telling the story. And then in chapter 4, it's like, then I, King Nebuchadnezzar, experienced this. So it's interesting that Nebuchadnezzar gets to contribute some of his story to this book, which is so fascinating. He tells the story of another nightmare. It's another puzzle that he can't figure out. And so Daniel solves it for him again. I'm going to let y'all read again, okay? So let's go to Daniel 4 through 37, kind of a longer passage. I'll let you read for a few minutes. I want to know, what is the dream? What does it mean? And then I want to know what happens to Nebuchadnezzar. So let's go and read that together. 4 through 37. I'll let you go. Go ahead. right, so what is the dream, first of all? What happens in the dream? Dream about a tree, right? I don't know why, but like singing Be Happy is in my head now. And in that dream, there was a tree. And it's just like all these animals kind of make their dwelling in the tree. In that tree, there was a bird, right? That's kind of where we are. Okay, and so all these creatures take shade in the tree, and then what happens? The tree is cut down. What else? Okay, all right. So the tree gets chopped down, and what's this mean? What's the dream about? The king is the tree, and everybody has, I guess, kind of basked in the glory of Babylon and the glory of King Nebuchadnezzar, of his kingdom, and the resources there, and the power, and the authority, and the influence. And now the king is going to be cut down. And it's really just kind of, he's going to, I guess in a way, kind of be uprooted, right? His life's going to be uprooted. And he's going to be brought low. All right, so what happens to Nebuchadnezzar? Fascinating story. Yeah, it's such a weird story, right? But he's sort of this king who sits on top of the world, right? Sits on a throne, the most powerful man in the world. Right? Sitting in a palace, living like a king. The next day, or whatever this was, the next day. It's a year. It's a year, isn't it? So a year later, this guy who's sitting in a palace is now living in a pasture. Right? He lives like an animal. He loses his mind. And this king who thought so highly of himself is brought low. So, what do we learn from the story of Nebuchadnezzar? What are some things we can learn from him?
I did like the Tower of Babel. Trying to make himself very
Yeah.
He was keeping back that guy.
That's a really good analogy. All the way back in Genesis, the story of Babel, the Tower of Babel. It's these people who really kind of think we can do anything we want. Let's become like God. And the story of King Nebuchadnezzar is a man who exalted himself. God humbles those who would pride themselves and be full of themselves. God would bring them low. Anything else you think?
I think it shows a lot that God cares about everything as a Jew. I mean, even though our standards today is very much that's what it's
Yeah, instead of just striking Nebuchadnezzar dead, he gives him an opportunity to do better, doesn't he? And that's how the story ends. And Nebuchadnezzar ends up telling the story, right? Remember, he's the one who's writing part of this, or at least giving the dialogue in chapter 4. Let's go to chapter 5. We have about, maybe 10 minutes left, so I'll do my best here. Chapter 5 is where I wanted us to end today. That's the story that we're reading. That's the chapter we're reading today. Chapter 5 is the story of the writing on the wall. And at the end of chapter 4, or maybe it's the beginning of chapter 5. It's the end of chapter 4. If you got your Bible open to chapter 4. Nebuchadnezzar dies. All right? So, new king. All right? And there's some people, I've noticed a footnote in my Bible. I think some translations would say the son of Nebuchadnezzar, but some would say his successor, right? The one who would come after. So either way, it's the next in line, the next king. So let's look. King Belshazzar. Oh, by the way, Daniel's name was Belteshazzar. This is a king named Belshazzar. Two different people. King Belshazzar, again named after a Babylonian god, made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of the 1,000. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, and maybe translations his predecessor or something like that, had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem to be brought, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Oh man, let's pause. What did he just say? He wanted to have a feast, and what's he want to use at the feast? The fine china, so to speak, from where? Not from China. The fine vessels from where? The temple. Which temple? The temple in Jerusalem. All right? So, hey, we got all these guests in the room. I tell you what, let's drink wine out of the vessels that they used to serve in the temple and serve their God with. Ooh, good move, bad move. All right, kind of a power move here. We've already seen how God would humble kings, right? Verse 3, they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God, just a little reminder there, in Jerusalem. And the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, Babylonian gods. So, this is not going to sit well with the God to drink from his stuff, right? And honor the Babylonian God. Right? So again, exalting himself. How do you think this is going to go? It's not going to go well. All right, next. Immediately, the fingers of a human hand. Do we have any like Addams Family fans in here, or like Wednesday? Do you watch Wednesday? So you got what do they call the hand? Thing, right? So you got thing who appears. Right, here we go. The fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. Then the king's color changed. I would imagine so. And his thoughts alarmed him. I would imagine so. His limbs gave way. I would imagine so. And his knees knocked together. Yeah, I think so. Just going to fall out. The king called loudly to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, the astrologers. The king declared to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck. I picture like Flavor Flav chain, right? And probably not like that. And shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king the interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed, and his lords were perplexed. Does this sound familiar? This is the third time that the God of Israel has stumped the kings of Babylon, right? And so who do you think is going to show up and save the day? Probably the guy who saved the day 3 other times, right? The interpreter of dreams. The wife of the king, now skip ahead in the story a little bit. The wife of the king says, you know what? There's a guy I bet who could solve this for you. It's the guy that served Nebuchadnezzar, and he could tell him his dreams. Verse 17, Daniel answered and said before the king, let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. By the way, this is an older Daniel at this point in the story. I feel like when we first met him, he's that young Obi-Wan Kenobi. This is Obi-Wan living in the caves. Right? This is him who's like, you know what? You keep your stuff. I don't need your stuff. I don't need your rewards. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar, your father, kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed, and whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up, and whom he would, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up, remember that story? And his spirit was hardened, so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. He's talking about when he lived like a beast in the field. He went all beast mode, right? Next, what does God do to those who exalt themselves? What's the recurring thing we've seen? Those who are exalted are humbled. And we're told that a lot. Even in the New Testament, we're told that, right? All right, let's keep going. Sorry, let's keep. I got 5 minutes. Let's keep going. He was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of a beast, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He was fed grass like an ox. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind and sets over it whom he will. And you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this. You saw it yourself. But you lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven. Again, lifting up, bringing low. And the vessels of his house have been brought in before you, and you and your lords, your wives, your concubines have drunk from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know, but the God in whose hand is your breath, and whose are all your ways, you have not honored. In other words, big mistake, right? Then from his presence the hand was sent. So God sent this hand, and this writing was inscribed. And this is the writing that was inscribed. Okay, here's what was written. So Daniel's going to reveal the mystery. Meaning, tekel, and parson. And this, it sounds like eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And this is the interpretation of the matter. Meaning, your God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed in purple, a chain of gold was put around his neck. Proclamation was made about him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed. So Daniel's exalted, the king dies. I don't know if Daniel's immediately brought low again. Well, I guess he's not, because in chapter 6 you get Daniel on the lion's den, and he's still in charge, still kind of one of the high ups. Anyway, so the interpretation, meaning, God is numbered. So meaning sounds like that word for numbered. In other words, your days are numbered, right? Tekel, you've been weighed in the balances. So God has weighed you, He's weighed your heart. And what's the balance? Has He been found like just in God's balances? What's He saying? God has weighed your heart, and you've been, God's proud of you. Is that what He says? No, you've been found wanting. You're not the kind of person in power that God wants to have. All right? And then Perez, it's going to be given to the Persians and the Medes, your kingdom. And so that night he dies. All right, this is cool. We're going to wrap up with this. We don't have a lot of time left. But I just want you to notice in this story the hands that are at play. Okay, this is kind of cool, I thought. So, what did Belshazzar do with his hands at the beginning of the story? How's it start? Remember? Sitting back, holding up the glass, drinking out of these vessels of gold from the temple, right? So that's kind of how it starts. Keep working. Come on. Come on, please. Just hurry. It's not working. Can you advance it for me, Kitty? All right. So what did the hand of God do in the story? It appears, writes on the wall. All right. Next. What does it mean when you lift up your hand against someone? Like in the Bible times. Someone would lift up their hand against someone. It's almost like you're challenging them, right? You would lift up your hand like you're going to fight them. So how's Nebuchadnezzar done that? What's the move that he did to sort of challenge God?
He stole.
Yeah, stole those vessels from the temple, put on this party to show how great he is. And so even this idea of like raising the glass, like, look how powerful I am, right? Look, we're the champions here, right? And keep going. The king held the vessel, but notice verse 23, it said, Daniel reminds him, no, God is holding your breath in His hand. Go ahead, Jimmy. You've praised the gods of silver and gold, which do not see or hear, but God, in whose hand is your breath, and whose are all your ways, you have not honored. All right, and then so next, now God lifts up His hand against Belshazzar, and the handwriting on the wall would seal his fate. You know, it's kind of interesting. Y'all have heard that expression before, right? Well, I saw the handwriting on the wall. That's literally where this expression comes from. It's from this story in Daniel chapter 5. All right, we're out of time. What I'd love to do, real quick, is I wish we had time to go through each of these chapters and just give a quick, like, takeaway. Do y'all want to do that?